All right, so welcome back to Cultural Anthropology. We're in chapter 3 today of Humanity by Peoples. And chapter 3 is dealing with language, but from an anthropological perspective. And so I'm going to have a lot of terms for you today and some graphs. But let's see, how do I want to start this? Let me start with the share screen. And Cheryl Myers, who used to teach here at the school, her and her husband were missionaries. Uh-oh, I just lost the screen I wanted. There it is. I see. And she, before she left the school, she made this little worksheet for me, which I found super helpful. And a lot of the terms we're going to have in this chapter are going to be here in this worksheet. So universal grammar. These are all the laws that pertain to all human languages, representing universal properties of languages. So when we were talking about culture the other day and how unique and different people groups are in different times and places throughout the world, I was pointing out a list of universals, things that all cultures have in common. For example, we talked about all cultures have a sense of ethics or morality. They all have a sense of modesty. They all have language. And within language, there are even universals that no matter where you go in the world, they are going to have these things. And that's what this list is here. So wherever humans exist, language exists. Language is our interface with the world. It's how we connect and convert actual things, physical objects, even abstract things like ideas into symbolic language. There are no primitive languages. All are equally complex, all are equally capable of expressing any concept. And I find this super interesting idea because lots of times you'll have people disparage not even just other languages, but even other dialects within the language. For example, when I was in college, I had a professor from Edinburgh, Scotland, and she had this really strong native Scottish brogue when she spoke. But she did her graduate work in Oxford, and in Oxford, they teach the Queen's English, or what I would call BBC English. So if you ever listen to the BBC, it's like this super proper, super enunciated type of English. That is not the kind of English we speak here in America. For in America, the standard is called American Standard English. And that's what I'm asking you to write your term papers on, your projects. That's how we converse in the class. Even though a lot of you may come from different parts of the country, many of our students come from a Hispanic background, which is going to have very different dialects. We'll have like a mixture, like Spanglish, right? Where we're so used to going back and forth between Spanish and English that we have hybrid words that work in both languages here on the border. I remember a few years back, people were putting down this idea of ebonics and how that shouldn't be taught in the classroom and things like that. But what our textbook and what these linguists are telling us is all of these are equally valid, equally complex. You can just imagine, though, how difficult it would be in a school setting if you had people writing from all different languages or even different dialects within a language. And so usually academic institutes, professional institutes have chosen a particular dialect or standard by which to teach and hold people accountable. So not to disparage other dialects or languages, but at least for our school and our academic purposes, we're using American Standard English. Thirdly, all languages change through time. If you ever took a Shakespeare class, you really need a lexicon, and a lexicon is like a list of all the words in the language, and it tells you their meanings. Well, a lot of Shakespeare's words meant one thing in the 1600s and they mean something completely different today. For example, I don't know why I have this example in my head, but he uses the phrase, get thee to a nunnery. Well, in 16th century English slang, that meant to a house of prostitution. So very different than what we might think of get you to a nunnery. And so words change through time. They change as we get new words coming in. A great example of that is all the technology words that have come into our vocabulary within the last 20 years or so. And we all know what they mean, right? Like if I say I want to interface with you on the live stream, I'm using like computer terminology, interface, but you guys understand that's like a dialogue we're going to have back and forth. We talk about downloading information or uploading our thoughts. And so even these technology terms have crept into our vocabulary. And this is what the philo-linguist, these anthropological linguists are going to look at, because when you look at a group's language, it's going to give you clues about the culture itself. Like, what is their level of technology? What is their belief system? What is their mores? What are their taboos? Because that's going to come out in our language. Fourthly, relationships between sound and meaning of spoken languages are for the most part arbitrary. And I used the example of tree in the last class. In English, we arbitrarily chose those sounds, the T sound, the R sound, the E sounds, to identify what we mean by a tall plant growing usually with branches, fruits, and nuts, etc. In different languages like Spanish, I know arbol, that is the random designated sounds meant to identify that same object we're using the word tree for in English. Fifthly, all human languages utilize a finite set of discrete sounds which combine to form meaningful elements or words. These words form an infinite set of possible sentences. And later, I'm going to show you the backside of this worksheet. And she has like kind of an inverted pyramid. And we're going to go through these different words and steps. And I think that would be a good way to teach through this section. All grammars, language systems contain rules for the formation of words and sentences of a similar kind. Okay. Every spoken language includes discrete sound segments like P or N or A, which can be defined by a finite set of properties. There's a class of vowels and a class of consonants. Woo. We also have like voiced and voiceless. There's tonal languages. It gets really complex. 8, similar grammatical categories, noun, verbs, can be found in all languages. Whoops. Semantic universals. The concept of female, male, water, fire exists in all languages. All languages have a means of referring to the past. Now, not all languages have past tenses and future tenses in their verbs. I have a niece studying Spanish right now, and I'm trying to help her, but I never got far enough in studying Spanish to learn how to speak in anything but the present tense. So when I'm speaking to someone in Spanish, I have to use other words to tell them if I mean now, yesterday, or tomorrow. And I think that's pretty interesting. Now I can do that without knowing how to change the verbs, right? So in English, for example, we would say, I'm going to the store, right? We're using the verb go, but we change it. Going means present tense. It's happening right now. If I'm talking about yesterday, I would say I went to the store, and then we can also use going in future tense to like, I'm going to the store, and then we qualify it by saying tomorrow, next week, next month. So if I was speaking in Spanish, I believe go is va. And I know it changes depending on how many people are going. If one person's going, it's va. If we're all going, it's vamos, I believe. If I have a Spanish speaker, you're welcome to correct me. But I don't know how to say I went yesterday or I'm going tomorrow in Spanish. Do I have any Spanish speakers that could tell me how to say that?
How to say what?
That I went yesterday and I'm going tomorrow? Because I only know the present tense va of go in Spanish.
Ya me voy.
Ya me voy, what does that mean?
I already went.
I already went. Ya me voy. And well, how do you say I'm going, like tomorrow?
That one I forgot. I don't speak Spanish very often.
Any other Spanish speakers in here? And I don't know, and with other languages, I thought Chinese only had present tense, so I'm finding this interesting. Do I have any Chinese speakers in the class? I'm going to have to research this some more. So often if you hear like a Chinese person that was a native born Chinese speaker and they've learned English, they'll often speak like, I go store now, I go store yesterday, I go store tomorrow. But that's how I'm sure I sound to a native Spanish speaker when I'm trying to communicate, since I don't understand the verb structure in Spanish like I do in English. And believe me, I don't understand it intellectually or academically. I only know it because I'm a native English speaker and certain things don't sound right to my ear. And so much of language is simply learned by growing up within a community and learning by osmosis, literally just hearing it and it connecting and making sense to you. And that's part of why it's more difficult to learn languages as you get older, because we kind of get like hardwired or in a groove of a certain way of thinking in languages in our minds. Like those of you who've tried to learn another language, for probably the first year or so, or a couple semesters, you're having to translate everything from one language into your native language. And then when you want to respond, you think of it in your native language, and then you have to figure out how to translate it into the other language. Once someone becomes fluent, they don't have to go through that two-step process. They can converse and even begin to think, even, yes, perchance dream in another language. And that's when I think you know you're getting fluent, is when you're actually thinking in another language. And this is the philosophical side that's really interesting to me, because some of the theories out there are suggesting that even the words we use to think are going to affect our worldview and our perception of reality. And I think there's a lot of value to that theory. Okay, speakers of all languages are capable of producing and comprehending an infinite set of sentences. And this is linguistic creativity. And much of it's spontaneous, like the words coming out of my mouth right now. I'm just making them up as I'm going along. I don't have a set or prepared script like this worksheet, but I'm just communicating with you, and I'm so adept at the English language, I can just keep generating new words, new sentences, new phrases in an infinite amount of varieties. Any normal child born anywhere in the world is capable of learning any language or languages to which they are exposed. All right, so that was the first sheet on that. And now let me see if I can pull up the other side. Let's see. All right. I know it's kind of small, but this is the worksheet she handed out to my class, and a lot of the terms we're going to cover is on this. So I think I can make it a little bit bigger. I think that's all I can go without losing it. Okay, so I'm just going to work through these different things with you. And so at the very bottom, I wrote this one in, is the phonemes. Well, let's go back even further. First, we have dialects, and dialects are different variations of a language group. The next term I want you to know is phonemes. And phonemes are the individual sounds within any particular language. These come under the study of phonology. And you can see, so phonemes are individual sounds. And so those would be all the different sounds we can make in the English language. Other languages.
Are we supposed to be seeing something? Because all I see is the Zoom page.
Oh, thank you. Let me try again. Thanks for saying something.
Sure thing.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, that wouldn't have made much sense, me rambling on. So as you can see on the very bottom of that inverted pyramid, I've written phonemes, okay? And so phonology, you can see that's up a couple rungs. That's how sound, this is the study of sound systems, or how sounds are placed in a consistent patterns. Phonemes are the distinct sounds of a language. And we have voiced and voiceless vibrations that come with different sounds. So, for example, we have voiced B and ba, ba. But then we have a voiceless P sound. P, p. And you can even feel the difference of the air in how we use our mouths to form those different sounds if you hold your hand up and make a B sound or a P sound. One is voice, the other is voiceless. The other is aspiration and pitch change the meaning of words. What you say isn't always as significant as how you say it, right? And I'm sure you've all heard your mama say that. It's like, it's not what you said, it's how you said it, or it's your tone or your pitch. But we even have techniques in our language so we know if something is a statement, a command, or a question. So for example, if I want to make something a question, all I have to do is lilt my voice at the end. Like, do I want to make that a question? And when I lilt my voice at the end, you know I'm asking for a response, as opposed to, I'm asking you a question. That's more of like a statement. I'm asking you a question? That's me questioning whether or not I'm asking you a question, okay? And we do that simply with the tone or pitch of our words. Now, you can imagine in tonal languages where almost every letter has its own tone and changes its meaning, how difficult that could be. So like in Chinese, you could be saying the same word, but depending on where you place the emphasis, or how, whether you're raising the pitch, whether you're lowering it, some have a up and down pitch, other is a more flat, and each of those will change the meaning of the word. And that's really intense to think about. The next word I want you to know is morphology. And this is the meaningful sequence and sounds with the rules that govern how they are formed. Language has a finite number of words found in a lexicon, but a morpheme is any sequence that carries meaning. And so we can have free, these can stand alone, and then we have bound morphemes. These would be like prefixes and suffixes, things that would not make sense if they're just standing alone. So those are the bound ones. The free ones, like even though pro and con can be prefixes, we can use them as standalone morphemes on their own. Any questions so far? Okay. Next, we have syntax. And this is the unconscious rules which tell speakers how to combine words into meaningful sentences, the use of verbs, structure of the word order, etc. So for example, in English, we use adjectives or descriptors before the subject. And so we would say something like the big white house. If we were speaking in Spanish, their sentence structure is you start with the subject, house, casa, and then you describe it, casa blanca grande. And that would be a Spanish way of saying big white house instead of how we do it. And to me, it makes a lot more sense, actually. I love how Spanish, a sentence actually starts with an inverted question mark if it's a question. So you know at the beginning of the sentence it's going to be a question. In English, you often don't know that a sentence is a question until you get to the very end and see the question mark, right? The other thing I like is we could have 15 adjectives before we even know what is actually being described. Where in Spanish, they're telling you the object up front, and then they go into all the descriptions of it. It's also interesting. I can't spell to save my life in English because there's so many rules and exceptions and so many different languages that have been blended together. That was one thing in Spanish I could do better than in English, because Spanish, it simply is spelled like it sounds in most cases. And I really appreciate that about Spanish. So syntax, that unconscious combination of words. In universal grammar, kind of like that list on the other page I showed you, all languages have vowels and consonants, past, ways to make negations, ways to make questions, requests, commands, how to express emotions. There's nouns, verbs, adverbs, and adjectives occur in all languages. Abstract concepts as well as observable events. Okay. So those are kind of like the building blocks of our language. Any questions on any of those? A lot of them are really close, so just make sure you know them well enough where you can distinguish the definitions when we get to the midterms, and it will serve you well. Okay, good. Well, if there's no questions, we get to do a little philosophy now, which I'm happy about. And the first guy they talk about is Noam Chomsky. And Noam Chomsky came up with this idea of universal grammar, and that this is inherited. And he even sees it like wired into our genetics. He speculates that even if someone was raised feral, like say by wolves or something, a human child would still develop their own language, even if there were no other humans to learn it from, because human language is how humans interact with and interface with the world. And so he really challenged the idea, if you remember back to John Locke and the tabula rasa, this idea that we're all born kind of like this piece of paper with just this blank slate. And then as we have experiences, different data or information kind of gets put on this blank slate. And then we use our reason to combine things together in new and meaningful ways. Well, Noam Chomsky is saying, no, you're born with this. You already have this template going on in your head. You may not know the specific sounds or words of your particular language group, but you are hardwired for language. And it's kind of like if you've ever seen little kids, like especially twins, often twins will create their own language that only they know. And they often do this as very small children. And I had quite a range of spectrum of kids in my family. Right now, they range from 33 to 16. So I don't even know what that is. What's that up? That's like a 17-year spread. And what I would find is with the really little kids, like the pre-linguistic kids in the house, I often couldn't understand what they were saying. But if I would ask their slightly older siblings, they could like interpret for me what the younger children were saying. And I just thought that was really interesting. And because they were doing almost like their own different dialect within the broader scope of the language being spoken in our family. So I like this about Noam Chomsky. He's saying humans actually aren't born with a blank slate. We are hardwired. I think we're hardwired for things beyond just language, but for the sake of this class and chapter, I think that's a really fascinating thing and maybe something that does make us unique from different animals. Although I think we could certainly make a case that animals certainly communicate and there would be linguistic qualities. They simply at least animals I'm aware of, have not developed a written language system, although they certainly communicate through grunts and barks and chirps and even like more abstract, right? Like honeybees can actually communicate distance, location, food source, and they do it with a dance. It's like a interpretive dance that the other bees can look at one bee dancing and they'll know where the sugar supply is or where the pollen is and how to find it.
Excuse me, Fred?
So, yeah, go ahead.
So, how do you spell the philosopher's name?
Yes.
Philosopher you were just talking about?
Noam, Noam, and his last name is Chomsky, Chomsky. And he is probably one of the highest regarded intellectuals in America living today. He's gone from linguistic studies where he does a lot of political commentary, and I find it quite stimulating and fascinating. One of his contributions was called The Manufacture of Consent, where he kind of critiques the press and how they report on things, and it's quite eye-opening. But anyways, Noam Chomsky, universal grammar, all humans are born with the ability to do language. And so a lot of that, the back sheet of this I read to you, would be compatible with Noam Chomsky's teachings. All right, in addition to this, languages give cultural classifications of reality. Each culture focuses on specific differences by which to label and categorize the world. This makes language like a cultural mirror, and that's what I was referring to. Once you get an insight into the words a culture uses and what words dominate and how they're used, it can give you an insight into the worldview or beliefs of those people. For example, specialized vocabulary for cultural needs. People living in the Arctic Circle are going to have very different linguistic needs than people living in a tropical rainforest or in a desert. And so you would expect to have specialized language that is associated with one's geographic environment. I know maybe like 3 or 4 words for snow. I believe that Inuit and people living in these Arctic climes have over 50 terms for the word snow. And each term is describing a minor variation in the snow. But you can see how important that would be if you lived in like the Arctic, where you don't have trees, you don't have mountains, you don't have hills. All you have is flat land, ice, and snow. Well, it might be very important to have really specific gradations like, yeah, Kumatek, when you get to the popcorn snow, that's when you need to make a right, or when you need to head west, or when you get to the snow cups, that's when you need to turn east. If you ski or involved in winter sports, you probably know more snow terms than the rest of us. But off the top of my head, I can only think of things like powder, sleet, slush, ice. But once again, if you were an Inuit or into skiing, you would probably have a whole lot more terms. The same with water, right? I love going to the ocean. I love body surfing, but I'm not a surfer. If you're a surfer, you're going to have a much more specialized vocabulary about different types of waves, different types of breaks, different types of conditions, different types of wind. And it's going to tell an outsider a lot about what your interests, your passions, where you spend your time is going to be reflected in your vocabulary. Anyone guess what topic English far outperforms any other language in? And what I'm getting at is, what do we have the most specialized terms in? Which topic of any other subject for the language English? Anyone? I know it's a weird random thing to ask, and I don't think I ever would have got it either, but it's war. And it makes sense. The English have been at war practically their whole history, and they have an incredibly sophisticated war language. Like, we don't just talk about advancing or retreating. We have tactical withdrawals. We have flanking maneuvers. We have all these different gradations. We even have things like collateral damage, friendly fire, all these really specialized wartime terms that other cultures may not have, simply because they did not need. It wasn't a part of their history or their background like it was for the English. Semantic domains. These are sets of words that belong to a specific group or category. So we have color words, we have food words, we have temperature words, we have laboratory words, we have tech words, we have sports words, and we have words that are furniture or that apply to humans or to vegetables. And so we have all these different domains in which words belong. Different cultures have different domains. And I used some examples the other class, like kinship, who you're related to. Different cultures are going to have different words for different degrees of relation. And I use that example of banana trees, armpits, and toads as being in the same semantic domain. At least for the Yanomamo Indians, those were all words that pertain to things that were dry on top and damp underneath. All right, the next philosophic thing I want you to consider is called the WharfSafer Hypothesis, and I'll spell that for you. WHORF, and then there's a dash, Saper, capital SAPIR. And I believe it's named after the two researchers, and I've also seen it listed as the Saper-Whorf hypothesis, but it's the same hypothesis. And this is what it is. And once again, this is what the essay questions will be on the midterm. I'll probably have a half dozen for you to look through. So things like Noam Chomsky universal grammar and the WharfSafer hypothesis. And what the WharfSafer hypothesis is saying is language shapes worldviews. Language is what allows us to interact with the world beyond ourselves. And think about it, even if you're not verbally speaking, you constantly have this internal voice or dialogue going on inside of your head, and it's telling me things like laptop, students, notes, book, chair, light, window. And I'm constantly doing this informational feedback with this voice in my head and the world around me. Well, the WharfSafer hypothesis says language becomes the world in which you live, but it also becomes the cage in which you are bound. Because what happens if you have a thought that is outside of your language? How are you supposed to express it? How are you supposed to explain it to someone else? So language is the world in which we live, but it also forms the boundary of that world. And so for those of you that are multilingual, and think about it, I'm not saying learning another language is going to double your world or worlds, but it's certainly going to allow you to express yourself and to understand things in a deeper way than if you were simply a single language speaker. I know when I speak in Spanish, it actually affects my personality, my mood, the way I carry myself. It's a much lighter, more melodic, romantic language than English. English is very direct, guttural. It comes from the Germanic roots. It can sound very harsh. I'll never forget when I finally got to go to Italy 2 years ago, and it was so beautiful hearing Italian. It was like bird singing. So much so that I didn't even want people to talk to me in English anymore. It was just too hard on my ears. I just wanted to hear that beautiful Italian. It was kind of sing-songy, a lot of emotion, a lot of passion. And I know those of you that are Spanish speakers, it's probably very similar for you. Spanish comes like Italian. It has a lot of Latin roots, carries a lot of the Latin feeling and flavor that's communicated not just in the language, but into the way people think and the way they relate to others in the world in which they live. Any questions on that one? What would be like a critique of this hypothesis? What would be some of the problems saying that language is the cage in which you live?
That doesn't take into account like other forms of expression.
Okay, right. Maybe some things are simply beyond words, right? So we have to express them with dance or just an exasperated sigh or groan. My biggest critique would be, then how do cultures come up with new words? Because they do all the time. So obviously people are able to think beyond what the linguistic limits of their culture have taught them. I know Immanuel Kant added, I don't even know how many words to the German language because the German language wasn't big enough for his ideas. Fortunately, German allows you to keep combining words together with hyphens to make these really long, like 20 hyphenated words combined to combine one concept or idea. But Kant had to actually introduce different words and different things into the German language to express some of his ideas or concepts that the language at the time could not express. And plus, we're always changing, right? As we discover new things, language is important, but we often can use other words. So for example, the Native Americans didn't have any word for train, but in their native language, they combined two words, iron and horse, to explain what a train was. A train was an iron horse. And so we can use our limited words. It might not be as precise as having a singular word for a thought or feeling or emotion or abstract idea, but language does have a way to communicate, even though it might take more words to come across than one. All right, enough of that. Social uses of speech. And this is the realm of social linguist. And a social linguist is looking at how speech behavior is affected by cultural factors and social context. Now, when I was doing the overview, we talked about how status and rank can affect the way we talk. The way you talk to your peers might be different than how you talk to your parents, might be different than how you talk to your teachers, preachers, the police. All of those people, you might take a very different tone or approach with depending on your social rank and status with them. And it's not just titles, right? Like you could put PhD in front of your name, or Mr. or Ms. or whatever, or Lord or Lady. I just saw on Facebook, you can buy titles of nobility now for like $50 if you want to have Lord or Lady put on your passport or driver's license. And maybe that's a big deal over in the United Kingdom, but I think in the United States, people would think you're just being silly. But you can buy them now. That's how they're generating some money in some of these old castles and families, is they're selling titles at $50 a pop. So rank, age. Also think about semantic domain and professions. All of you have different majors. Well, if you're a Bible major, you are going to learn a lot of specialized terms, if not other languages like Greek and Hebrew, to have a better understanding of the scripture. But if you're not a Bible major, how many of you know what, let me do a test. Bible majors don't answer. How many of you know what hamartiology is or soteriology? Anybody? Hamartiology or
I
soteriology?
just learned them today.
Oh,
Yeah,
from
we learned them
Whitney?
we learned them in theology. Soteriology is I think it's a study of sin, or maybe
That's the first one, hamartiology.
yeah, hamartiology, and then soteriology is the study of, can't remember, but we learned them in theology today. Yeah,
Salvation.
yeah, that's what
Soteriology
it
is
was. Yeah,
salvation.
yeah.
How are we saved? If you're a psychology major, you're going to learn great words like cognitive dissonance and other different angst and fugue states and things that the general population may not have any idea what those terms mean. If you're in kinesiology or sports medicine, you're going to learn all sorts of technical terms about the body, the muscle groups, the cartilage, the ligaments, things that if you're not in that field, you're not going to know what people are talking about most likely. So language can be very specialized, and it will have a semantic domain. We also use language to persuade others of our point of view or to try to get others to give us what we want. And some people are really good at it, right? There's some really persuasive speakers out there that once they open their mouth, you know you're going to give them what they want. And we also use language to put ourselves in a better light, right? The way we paint a picture of what just happened. And like the Proverbs tell us, don't make a judgment based on what the first messenger or witness says. Wait till you hear the other side of the story before you make a decision. Because people, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's our ego or trying to protect ourselves or we're the center of our own little worlds, but we love to paint ourselves in the good light and then disparage those perspectives that are contrary to our way of thinking. And it's very helpful if you can get a spectrum of perspectives before making judgments. And the last part of this section is idioms. Oh, one more thing. I want to show you a video. Actually, I'll save it for an end in case YouTube decides to say it's a copyright violation and shuts off the sound of my video once I upload it. But I did find a clip of, it's very rare for any native speaker to actually ever hear what their own language sounds like. Like when you're speaking to me in English, I'm not really hearing the sounds and tones consciously so much, because in my mind, I'm interpreting what you're saying into something meaningful that I can then process and think about. The only time I think I ever heard English was in college. The school I went to had made us go to some fine art series a couple times a semester. And one of the options was to go to an opera. And I went to my first German opera, which if you ever want to torture me, that would be a great way to do it. Just put me in a room with a German opera going on. It was just, for one, German, like I compared it to Italian. It's a very harsh language. But I remember sitting there, and you know how you kind of are phasing in and out during a long, boring event. Well, we're probably an hour into this German opera, and all of a sudden I realized I could understand everything the singers were singing. And then I realized at some point they had switched from German to English, but I don't know when that transition took place, because German and English are very similar languages. And because I had kind of mentally checked out, I actually got to hear what English sounded like until I realized it was English, and then I just started translating again into what the words meant. And so the video I'm going to show you, they've taken the phonemes, the discrete individual sounds of English, but they've combined them in ways we do not combine them in English. And so you get to hear what English sounds like, because your brain is going to be trying to translate what they're saying, but it's all just going to come across as gibberish because it's not following morphology, the way we put different sounds together to make words, and then syntax using those words to make sentences. But before I show you that, I want to talk about idioms. Can anyone tell me what an idiom is? I had no idea I spoke with so many idioms until I taught my first English as a second language class. All my students.
Is that like slang? It's like
yeah,
slang.
it's like slang or a figure of speech. Thank you.
Yeah, so like if I say like no cap, that means like for me it would mean like I'm not lying, but like you wouldn't understand because it's my slang. It's slang of our generation.
Yeah, what did you just say? No what?
No cap.
No cap?
Yeah. So if you were to go up to someone, or if someone was to come up to you and say, "Mr. Blackburn, you look amazing today," you could say no cap because they aren't lying, and you would know that. So like no cap.
Or no cap.
Or if I was to say like
no caption.
yeah, no cap is like you're not lying.
not at
That's
all.
no lie.
Got it.
Huh,
Do you know why it means that?
Cap. I don't remember the exact origination, but I mean, there's like I'll give you another example. Like if I was to say you're tripping, that originates from like LSD trips, right? And so our generation says like when you're tripping, that means like you're acting crazy.
Right. Yeah, I know that one.
Well, that one's simple.
I'm tripping all the time.
Yeah.
I did get called a goat the other day, and
Yeah.
I was offended at first till someone told me what it meant, and I thought that was really nice. But
Yeah, you're the.
but I don't know why a goat would be chosen. Well, I guess because it's an acronym, right?
It's an
Because
acronym.
each letter means something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I didn't realize was how culturally specific idioms are. So these poor Korean students I was teaching, I'm up there using all these American idioms, and they learned English like I learned Spanish, very formal. You're learning the proper way to speak. You're learning the standard things, but they're not teaching you slang. They're not teaching you figures of speech. Maybe when you get in a more advanced class you are, but I never got that far. And so my poor students didn't understand half of what I was trying to tell them because I'm rolling out all these wild American idioms. And just a few, we could say like long in the tooth, over the hill. Both of those means you're old, right? Because as you get older, your gums recede and it looks like you have longer teeth. And over the hill, I guess you've crested, you've peaked, and now you're headed down the other side. But every culture has different idioms. And so probably for the discussion board this week, this won't be due till Sunday night, I may ask you to share an idiom with the class. Tell us what it is. I'd especially be interested in idioms from other countries. If you speak a second language or if you come from a different cultural background, I always love learning idioms because often they won't make sense in an American context, but they make perfect sense in the culture in which they came from. Just like a lot of our idioms, like kick the bucket. Why in the world would that mean someone died? But that's an American idiom. And if you didn't grow up with that, it could be quite confusing. Like, what do they mean, Grandpa kicked the bucket? Does he need his balance medication? No, it's much worse than that. Does anyone have an idiom from another country off the top of their head they want to share?
I do. So in like Mexican cultures, we say like mucha ropa. It means too much clothing, and it's very similar to like when in English we say take it off. Like when we're teasing people, like take it off, take it off. We say mucha ropa, and so it's mucha ropa, mucha ropa, and it's like to tease people. Like when it's hot outside and they're taking off their jacket, we say that as if like they're giving a strip tease.
Got it. Thank you. Anyone else got an idiom?
And when I say less, like if you were to say like, Joe, you look handsome today, I'd be like, say less. Like that means I approve of what you're saying. Like, okay. Yeah.
Wow. Who's speaking to me right now?
Big
Joe,
Joe.
I'm on who's this?
Liz's.
Yeah, Liz's computer.
What's your name?
Joe.
Joe?
Yeah,
Thanks,
I saw you
Joe.
in the I saw you in the library today. I was like, Fred Blackburn.
Oh, is
And
that
he's like,
you?
Yeah.
I couldn't recognize you with your mask
Yeah, I
on.
know. I could tell. It's okay though. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my one outing. The president wanted us
I
to have
know.
a meeting in the breezeway, so I
Yeah,
made
you look
it up
like
there.
take this as a compliment. You look like a hobbit. Like you look like you get around, you know? Like you're like you might seem old because you have a white beard, right? But like you just look like physically like in shape, like and fit.
Well, I'm a hiker.
Yeah,
like
I could
being in
tell,
the
dude. I
woods.
could tell. We gotta go on a hike sometime, man.
Well, I do have my hiking class. I'm looking for a few more people.
I would
Kinesiology
love to.
103.
I would love to, man.
It's not too late to join. We'll be
Yeah.
doing.
Say
We were
less,
going to
man.
do our first hike this weekend,
Hey,
but
hey,
no
say less.
way.
Say less, Mr. Blackburn.
Bet.
I'm going to have to learn your idioms to
Oh,
communicate.
I got so many, man. You don't even know. I'll teach you. I'll be your idiom teacher.
Thank
You
you.
can be my teacher. I'll be your idiom teacher.
Great. Any
I love
other
that.
idioms, foreign or domestic?
There's an Italian idiom. It's hai voluto una bicicletta. It literally means you wanted the bike, but it's pretty much just means like you wanted it, so now you have it. Like almost like compare it like like you made your bed, now go lie in it, kind of
Okay.
in English. Yeah,
Got
like
it.
you made the choice, now deal with it.
Got it. Yeah, but see, if we're not Italian, we would have to have that explained to us. Where if you
Yeah.
grew up with that saying, it's just, it makes intuitive sense. And
Mhm.
so idioms are a great way of learning about cultures and languages. And like I said, that's probably what I'll ask you all to do on the discussion board this week is everyone share an idiom with us. And hopefully we'll get some that aren't American. And I mean, it wouldn't hurt to have American ones too. Maybe I'll ask for one American and ask you guys to research. And if you go to Barnes and Noble, or if you just do a Google internet search for idioms of different countries, I mean, there's thousands, probably tens of thousands out there. I saw this book of idioms. I was just like massive. And it was just dealing with English or American idioms. Okay, well, I'm going to show you guys a couple videos now, but I think I'm going to stop my recording because I don't want to get YouTube banning my video from the whole thing. So let me stop this recording and